Hi, I'm Morten Solvik, Vice President of Mahler Foundation and host, writer, and producer of the Mahler Hour, where we bring you the personalities, places, and projects happening right now in the Mahler community around the world. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all back to the Mahler Hour and to this, the first show of our sixth season. Over the years, we've had the good fortune to invite dozens of guests to our show covering all manner of topics relating to the great composer. It never ceases to amaze me how relevant Mahler's work is to our life and times in the 21st century. How much there is to talk about, not only regarding the past, but also the here and now. Mahler's biography and work serve as a reminder of who we are and what is truly important in life. This season, we will once again touch on some of these topics with some important events and new projects, including new films by Hillan Warshaw and Jason Starr, more reflections on Mahler's songs with Thomas Hampson, an exploration of Mahler's humor, and today, casting a glance at one of Mahler's favorite outdoor hobbies, bicycling. Before we begin, let me remind everyone that the Mahler Hour is brought to you by Mahler Foundation. So if you want to support our activities, please become a member. Just go to our website at mahlerfoundation.org for all of the details. Now, let's get right to it. Joining me today for Mahler on the Bicycle is musicologist Brent Wetters. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody, or happy to be here, I should say.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be an expert on this little explored aspect of Gustav Mahler, or velomusicology, as you call it.
So I can in a pretty detailed way pinpoint exactly when I became interested in this. So it was in 2013 at the AMS conference in November of that year. At that point, I had just about finished my dissertation the year before on the Darmstadt summer courses, and I mostly thought of myself as a 20th century person, right? That was mostly what I did. But as a music listener, Mahler was always somebody that I cared deeply about, and I had even written a little bit about his relationship to some of the post-war generation. But so I was looking for a panel to go to at AMS, and I saw a Mahler panel and thought, why not? And so on that panel, there was a paper by Anna Stoll-Knecht and another by Thomas Peaty. So Thomas Peaty's paper was about Mahler and soundscape and thinking about the ways in which maybe we could understand the symphonies as a kind of filtering process where he goes out on these solitary walks, hears his environment, and then incorporates it into the symphonies. So, the main examples would be things like the post-horn solo in the Third Symphony or the cuckoos in the first, right? All of these things that he hears in his environment and then transfers into a kind of symphonic soundscape, right? And so he made reference to the soundscape composers of Canada and the sort of post-war computer music that makes use of those kinds of ideas, but he sort of applied it to Mahler. Great. So he gives this paper, really interesting paper. The first question after the paper was from Marilyn McCoy, and she raised her hand and said, so really interesting, but did you know that Mahler was also a cyclist? And how might a soundscape on a bicycle differ from a soundscape just walking through a landscape, right? So she asked this, and then she told a story which we'll get to later about Mahler almost killing himself trying to climb a mountain on his bicycle. And that's where my ears really perked up because, right, I'm in addition to loving Mahler and listening to his music, I'm also a cyclist. And so one of the things I particularly like doing is finding hills and finding gradients. I have a website that I use and where I make these maps of the steepness of hills, and I'm always looking for obscure and interesting hills. So I thought, okay, I've got to go find Mahler's roots. So the first thing I really wanted to do was to be able to figure out where he was riding and to go ride those things myself, and I've done most of that. But then I started also looking into his bicycle and sort of collecting all the information I could. I figured, but this is an opportunity to become the world's leading expert on something. So I figured, I'll make that my mission for the next several years. And I've been working on this project on and off for the last, I guess it's now 13, 14 years. So
So
yeah.
we'll be getting to a lot of this in just a minute, Brent, but I want to begin with also, of course, with bicycling itself, something that we need to contextualize, I think, historically. And the advent of this, of course, the bicycle goes back in its original formation of something that resembled a bicycle anyway to the early 19th century. But we're going to fast forward to Mahler's time because this was especially important time in the development of the bicycle, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So the 1890s in particular was a moment of transition where the bicycle went from something that was a little bit of a niche market, right, for people who are particularly enthusiasts or risk takers, right? It went from something that was kind of a daredevil sport to something that was much more for everybody. And that coincided with the introduction of what was called the safety bicycle
So let's
sometime
take a look at
in
that.
time.
Let's take
Yeah.
a look at the old sort of the bicycles that we all associate perhaps with the 1880s, and these were called a penny farthing.
Yeah,
Uh, um,
they went by a couple of names. Penny farthing is the one that they most commonly go by now because the if you look at the ratio of the front wheel to the back wheel, it's about the ratio of a penny to a farthing, right? But they're also somehow I muted there. I'm not sure how that happened. So yeah, sorry, I was saying, right, they're called the penny farthing because they are the relationship of the front wheel to the back wheel is about that ratio. Go by a couple of other names as well, but yeah, that's
and as
that's
you say, this was a dangerous sport, one that, because they were mounted so high, could lead to some serious injury, in fact, even deaths. And it was also very expensive, and it was sort of a very, very limited public. Although we do see here a woman on what is a modified penny farthing, which I thought was a fascinating example of women already involved in this sport. She seems to be propelled by some sort of hand motion. Is that right?
yeah, some hand levers and as well as foot levers that are propelling it forward. And so there were lots of different technologies that even back in the pre-penny farthing era that had been tried out to make them either self-propelling, right? There was a coal-fired velocipede that you can find in the archives that existed before the penny
Mhm.
farthing. So right, they were trying out a whole lot of things before they end up settling on the kind of double triangle um,
And
format that we're most familiar with.
before we leave this, I want to point to everyone's attention to the gentleman over here on the right-hand side with his feet up. We're going to talk about downhill adventures later in the show, so just keep in mind this gentleman there, and some problems with braking and downhill
And
challenges. So, but now we'll go from this. This is the bicycle that really became sort of it in the 1880s to the safety bicycle that you just mentioned. If we go to the next slide, I think we have that. That's the safety bicycle. In fact, this happens to be one that is for two people. Um,
but the format's essentially the same. It just has two wheels in the front, and yeah, I mean, so to say about the penny farthing, right? The reason that wheel has to be so big is that the pedals are directly connected to the tire. So every time you rotate your pedals, you're doing one rotation of that tire. And if if the wheel were smaller, you would be going too slow, right? You'd have to spin really fast. But so the speed of the bike is determined at that point by the size of that front wheel. And so if you want to do something different, they had to invent something else. And so the chain ring and chain system ends up being the one that is settled on.
So you see the difference in the height of there's a mechanism. We'll talk about the mechanism in just a little bit, but obviously, and these were pneumatic tires, right? So it was a much closer to the ground and much easier to use. And it became, this is really when the rage kind of exploded, didn't it? This is when bicycling became a real fashion and more accessible to many more people.
Right. And it became a transportation method that just about right. Some people do it for sport, which Mahler is going to be one of those, but other people, it just becomes the most convenient way to get around cities
Yeah.
during this
Yeah.
period.
So the next one we have another one here, another safety bicycle, and this is important because it is a safety bicycle for women. And I've already pointed out in the first example that we had of a woman riding a bicycle, this access to women riding bicycles, as you say, the ability to travel, the notion of independence, and so on. became an instrument, literally, for the advancement of women's causes at the turn of the century. So, as much as we think of bicycling as a sport or something as a pastime, this really has social implications. And let's go to an example
And
from
And
from
that double triangle thing that you would see on the previous slide, right? The problem with that, of course, is that
yes,
a dress would interfere that, and we couldn't possibly have women wearing pants
right,
to ride bicycles, so it needed to have a different shape to the bicycle to accommodate riding in a dress, right? That's
right,
why, and
and
they're called either step throughs or still sometimes called women's bikes. You can still buy bikes with that basic format of the
but
tube
it was
down.
still considered scandalous in that the woman had to straddle this device, and as fashion needed to change, because even with a dress you couldn't really ride this thing. You
Mhm.
had to change the way that dresses were constructed in their length, and the notion of adding sort of a pant feature to this to make it more accessible to women riding had a wide impact on fashion, but also on the symbology of this sport. We can go to the next slide. I think we can see some of the maybe the unexpected places it shows up in popular culture. One was in songs. Uh, there's an index of songs, popular songs from the turn of the century, of about 300 songs that were written about this sport, as were many fashions discussed in songs. But it's striking how often women are mentioned in these pieces. This is called The Bicycle Girl, and here you see a woman riding the bicycle. It's the topic of the song itself. It is about her newfound freedom, her independence of style and personality, and all it takes up these social currents that we just alluded to. And we see also the fashion implications here, which is starting to resemble very much pants, and something that is, or something getting close to a half dress, half pant. And we have another one, I think, too, another cover. And yeah, this is the latest fad. And here we see another example of this. And these songs were celebrating and, in a sense, also scandalizing this new sport in a way that is quite revealing, I think, of the times, and was something that people had um, taken notice of, and especially women. We have one more example, actually, if we can go back to of women here en masse in a bicycle event, um, and you'll see their fashion as well. Uh, Here we have more of the skirts and dresses to the right, but then see a woman who is no, not yet. Please, we need to go. No, we need to go back. Um, we see the woman there on the right, on the left, with really what are pants. And of course, Paris being Paris, now we can go to the next one. We see the advent around the turn of the century of what we call the bloomers, which of course is as scandalous as it got. You see the woman there sitting at the table with her bloomers, and another one getting on her bike with her bloomers, which was the equivalent of a woman in her underwear, essentially gallivanting around in a public space. This is I think the Bois de Boulogne in Paris. So again, this was taken up immediately by the arts, by song, by popular culture, but also politically in the political movement of the suffragettes, etc. Um, Not irrelevant also to Mahler's biography, in that Mahler's close friend Natalie Bauer-Lechner was also a very strong advocate of women's rights at the time, and something that will show up in
And
his.
also a very big advocate for bicycling. She even has an article about extolling the virtues of cycling as an activity.
That's
Um,
right. and the and also the notion of independence. So we're gonna post something in the chat when we go to the when we post this show, and we'll give you another link to an article if you're interested in pursuing or learning more about this the fascinating social dimension of this very important pastime that Mahler got involved in. But let's turn to Mahler, because here we are getting closer to the immediate topic. He was very fond of the outdoors. He was an athletic person. He was a rower, a swimmer, a hiker. Kind of makes sense that he would then turn to this new way of getting involved, right?
yeah, absolutely. So he was somebody who was always looking for activities that took him out, and he had a very don't want to quite say aggressive style, but a very self-assured way of traveling, right? And there are reports, say, from I think it was Alma, who said, like, I don't like going going rowing with him because he's always like it's as if he's competing with some unseen opponent, right? And so he's always doing things that are testing his own physical limits, and he's always pushing the limits of what he can do, either hiking or in this case biking and rowing and everything else.
But isn't this kind of a metaphor for his life and personality, even
I
his
think so, right?
compositions?
Yeah, and I think that the symphonies also have this quality of just a struggle to get through them, right? There's a process of the struggle of getting them down on paper seems to be as much of the kind of issue there as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
But we don't know exactly, do we, when he started bicycling, but we have some fascinating correspondence with a friend of his in Hamburg, Wilhelm Zinne.
yeah,
Uh, here's a letter. Der Herr Z. When is our first excursion? I've already completed the first stage of mastering this. Regarding the velocipede, so we need to clarify that term, which is an old word for bicycle, right?
right. That's so the velocipede was the first thing that comes out in around 1815 or like the beginning of the 1800s. And essentially for anybody who has kids these days, it works about the same way as one of these balance bikes that kids now ride on, right? It's a bike to learn the process of balancing without having to worry about pedaling. So you get your speed by walking it with this bike in between you, and then you can coast by sitting up on by lifting your legs and getting but there's no pedal mechanism. It's all either pushed or gravity that pulls you downhill or something else. But that's not what he had. The term was still in circulation just because it was, right, an old-fashioned term for a bicycle.
Well, of
Yeah.
course, Mahler is famously ironic about much of what he says, and especially with Cinna. They apparently had a very joking relationship because he has exaggerations and puns in many of these letters. He goes on to say, I suppose I'm stuck with Rake, but that's no bad thing. He charges 340 marks for a vehicle in terms of payment, and not bad either. Whereas on the old one, which indicates he probably had a bicycle already.
Yeah.
And what have I to pay? I'm looking forward to our first ride, yours ever, Mahler, Oberstrasse 1 in 87. So here we have him reaching out to a friend in Hamburg saying, let's go bicycle riding. But it seems to be actually, and he's buying a bike from this
Place called Rake. Yeah.
distributor,
Yeah.
Rake. And you have found a fascinating advertisement from the Rake,
Yeah,
which
so
shows.
this was the one of the longest processes in terms of my collecting information was to figure out what his actual bicycle was, because you look up Rake and you can find a few things, right? You can find mentions of that there is this shop that existed in Hamburg. You can find there's a later mention of a bicycle called the Rake's Pyramidal, but none of that seems like it was or seemed like it was the right bike. And I couldn't find any um, reference to the fact that there were actually bicycles with his brand with that brand on them. So I found all sorts of other advertisements, but not this one until I finally found this is from I think April 18th in 1895, an advertisement in one of the Hamburg newspapers that gave me the clue that I needed, which is that he's not making his own bicycles at this point. Maybe later he does that to some extent, but he's selling bikes from Seidel and Naumann. They are in fact a big and famous bicycle brand that there is quite a bit more information. You can find some of the bicycles on auction, not many that get back to Mahler's era, but I have found one. A couple years ago. So it is possible, but it is in fact, right. It's some sort of a Seidel and Naumann bicycle that he almost certainly bought from Rake, would be my best guess.
So this shows, and it's 1895. This is literally an advertisement that comes up about a month before the letter we just read. And what's fascinating about this is it's saying I not only sell the bicycles, I have an institute of teaching, a teaching
Right.
institute for learning how to ride the bicycle. And then in almost the same font size, he writes for women on Mondays and Fridays.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. So
so don't be shy, women. Come and learn to ride the bicycle too. This guy knows his market, and in even smaller letters that you can't read here, no need to be embarrassed. There's sort of this everybody learns, everybody's going to make mistakes, and he's really inviting his public here to join
And I,
this sport.
and I think we see the legacy of the penny farthing, right? That people are still seeing this as something that is not for everybody, that is only something for daredevils or people that are
Right.
right. They're saying they're trying to make it inviting, making it into something that anybody can do, right? And yeah, you might need some instruction, but we'll help you through the process.
Exactly. And so, and we here, we go back to the friendship with Cinna, because here he's also um, apparently somehow involved in a sense of instruction with him. There's another note from almost the same time. He says, "Dear friend, I attract a great deal of admiration on my bike." Of course, he's exaggerating now with Cinna. "I really seem to be born for cycling and will certainly at some point be named Geheimrat." Now, this is a pun in German that is untranslatable. Geheimrat means privy councillor in German, but it has the word Rad, which means bicycle at the end of it. So I'm a counselor and a bicycle, so to speak, and I will certainly at some point be named a privy councillor just because of his affiliation with bicycling, which of course is meant to be funny. I've already reached the point where all horses give way to me. I'm still struggling when it comes to ringing the bell, though. On such occasions, I sometimes dismount very rapidly. We'll talk more about that. I can't bring myself to simply run over a cabbie, although they actually deserve it, as they always stay in the middle of the road without any consideration for the fact that all streets are too narrow for such an energetic cyclist anyway. All still well. Yours sincerely, Gustav Mahler. I just love the humor and the sort of the self humor.
I just love the image of Mahler just terrorizing the streets of Hamburg on his bicycle. Like everybody's like, "Oh my God, who's this person plowing through all the pedestrians and horses?" And yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic.
careening down some hill and having to get off quickly. Yeah, that's it's a side of Mahler we don't usually, consider or even know about. So this is it's quite wonderful, and I love, as I said, his the use of his of language, of course, is really phenomenal. But to get back to what you were saying, you were looking into Reik and the whole background of this, and you've looked into the brands and the type, and you've tried to really
Yeah, because
find the
he does
bike.
give us he gives us a price, right? And so that allowed me to narrow it down a little bit, right? I've never found an article or an advertisement from Rake that says 340 marks for this particular bike, but I do have catalogs from Seidel and Naumann that give list prices for these, and so you can narrow it down to about 3 or 4 models. Most of them carry the brand name Germania, so it's a Seidel and Naumann Germania. They made a 0, a 1, an 8, and a 9 are all possible
Mhm.
versions. I've seen a Germania 1 in person from I think 1900, so it's close to the same period. But yeah, they're
Is that what we have
fantastic.
here? I think we may
Uh,
have a photograph of some
yeah,
type.
the photograph of an actual bicycle.
So
Not
here's
that's
the
the
Germania
advertisement for the
Zero.
zero. Yeah, that's the zero. That's the actual bicycle. This is a bike that I went to visit in Leipzig. I was kind of hoping I could buy it for myself, but he was asking something like 7,000 euros for it. But I got to look at it and ride it and take a peek at the bike itself. So it was worth it for that. And got a
So in the
bunch of
next slide, in the next slide, we can look a little more carefully at the gearing, because this is an
yeah,
important point. There is no way to change the gear once you're underway
correct.
biking. Now, technically speaking, you can change the ratio, and you could even do that if you wanted to on your ride, but that's clearly not what Mahler was
Yeah,
doing.
I don't think there's any indication that Mahler would have he would have had to have brought wrenches and pulled it. Like hardcore cyclists did do that sometimes, but this means that when you get to a hill, you have the same ratio. So as he's going uphill, he's either really struggling or he's going to have to get off and push his bike, one of the two.
Right.
Uh,
It's
and
quite
but he is also has the opportunity to pick his gear when he starts. But even that, I somewhat doubt whether Mahler was thinking ahead that much, right? So he's buying in Hamburg, which is mostly flat. He's probably getting a gear ratio that is appropriate for driving around Hamburg, and then he takes it to Steinbach, and he's going to find it difficult. And I
yeah.
don't know that he's going to really think of changing his gears as much of an option. So he
Well,
probably had just the stock gearing.
yeah, and I think it shows it's a testament a little bit to his physicality. and his ability to use this bicycle. As some of you who were perhaps at the Steinbach Festival in 2017, where Brent was also there, we did, in fact, a bicycle trip from Steinbach to Bad Ischl with modern bicycles, and with modern bicycles that were, some of them were also electric. And you
We
get
had electric assist on that trip, which made it very easy. But
right. So it's actually it's very much bicycling today, but it's a far different exercise from Mahler back in 1895, 96. Um, let's he does. So you're right. He's practicing in Hamburg, but in some ways it seems he's very much has his eyes set on his summer vacations, where he
right.
has more time to actually engage in the sport. There's a wonderful letter to Anna von Mildenberg in 1896, the following summer. I enjoy riding around on my bicycle. It's the only sport apart from composing that I do here. Of course, another.
I love that he calls composing a sport too, right? That's more.
Yeah. More irony.
Yeah.
My sisters, poor things, are terribly bored. They have no stimulation whatsoever, especially since I have to devote most of the day to my work and bike rides, the latter being a much needed afternoon respite after a strenuous morning in the composing hut. I find that a fascinating reflection on his need to move his body after an intense morning of composing, and
Yeah.
praising the bicycle for being exactly the outlet he was searching for.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fantastic. And yeah, it's something I definitely relate to myself as a cyclist, that you can only spend so much time working on writing or composing, and then cycling is this opportunity to just clear your head, right? It's
Yeah.
a moment where you can shut off all of those other kinds of inputs. So I sometimes convince myself that I will be able to go out for a bike ride and keep working in my head on a bit of writing or a composition
Mhm.
question. It never works, right? My head just sort of shuts off for that period, and it still helps, but it helps for a different reason. It's not that I can sort of compose or write while I am
Yeah.
cycling.
And so he would probably do this on a fairly regular basis, even daily basis. But when he was done with a chunk of composition, when he had finished a movement or a section or a stage of composition, he would then take a couple days and go bike riding, as we know.
Right.
And here's an example of one where he's on his way to Bad Ischl. My dearest Anna, it is thundering in the distance outside, but I'm packing my bags and cycling off to Ischl. My work is finished, which is why he's taking these few days, and I must leave to get some rest. I'm quite exhausted. So he's getting rest by taking a bike ride. I'm quite exhausted. I will be away for 4 to 5 days. I don't know yet where I'll stay, but I suspect that I will do a bit of climbing in the mountains. So this is this is Mahler's notion of rest. And of course, it's rest from mental exercise and composing. And we know that who was in Bad Ischl? It was Johannes Brahms who was in Bad Ischl, and Mahler visited on a regular basis when he was living in Steinbach, not too far away, although it is quite a bike ride up and down a little mountain pass or hill there. And he went off to Hallstätter See and other places, didn't he?
He did, yeah. So he goes from Steinbach to Bad Ischl, then on to Hallstatt. He doesn't really say how long any of this takes, whether he does it all in one day or breaks it up, or how he stays in between. And there's a lot of information on some of these rides where he doesn't quite give enough information to recreate the entire trip. We'll see that with the big trip also in a second. Yeah.
Yeah. He does send a postcard from Hallstatt, and he does send another letter to Anna, I think, when he's back on the 17th. So it turned out to be about 6 days.
Right.
Anyway, so he leaves Steinbach behind in 1896, but he was not done bicycling.
No, not at all. Right. He saved his best for 1900, when he was his first year at the Wörthersee in the Meyernig house. This is the year, in fact, that he gets there. He has not built the villa yet. He's staying at the Via Antonio, which is just a couple, maybe less than a mile away from the current Via. But he does have his composition hut for that first summer, and
Right.
that's when he does some of his significant riding.
He's also there with Natalie Bauer-Lechner
Our Lechner is still there for that
before
at that point.
before he meets Alma.
Yeah, it's
And
just before
the
that.
two of them are actively, we should say this too, in Steinbach too, actively bicycling together. He leaves out those mentions of Natalie when he's writing to his girlfriend Anna.
Right.
Um, but at this point, he's no longer with Anna, and it's just Natalie. And they're spending a lot of time bicycling. So she gets to observe firsthand Mahler with his contraption. And we just had a sort of a summary. Well, let's go back to her memories of this. Between his work for recreation, Mahler took a half-day excursion. In order to achieve as much motion in as short a time as possible, he attempted to ride around the entire lake. We're talking about Wörthersee now.
And that's a big ride, right? That on a modern bike, I did it 2 summers ago. It's like a 30-mile ride. It's easy as long as you stay by the lake. If you decide to take any detours, which I did to go up and see a Alban Berg statue, then you're going up some pretty significant hills. But as long as he stayed by the lake, it would have been mostly flat.
Still, as you say,
Yeah.
30 miles on that older bike is no easy
Oh,
trick either.
yeah.
And not only that, as she goes on to say, and in the process, he crashed twice and tore up his hand, fortunately the left, that tortured him for 8 days, and he was left with bruises on all of his limbs. So,
Yeah, he has a propensity for accidents. There's another one I don't think we have on our thing, but where he's coming down a hill in into Innsbruck and and keeping in mind, right, that on a fixed gear bike, it's not there's no freewheel. So the anytime the bike is moving, those pedals are moving too. So typically what people would do is lift up their legs, put them on the fork of the bike, and then you have no real way of braking. There is a brake that you can push, but that just pushes directly into the tire. If you push it too hard, you're just going to flip over the front of the bike or puncture the tire. So it's really not a good system for going downhill. And so at some point he veers off the road entirely and almost goes into a ravine on a completely different trip, right? So he's no, and if you look in the index to Delagrange, one of the first things I saw when I was doing this, you see if you look up bicycle in the Delagrange index, the first entry is Mahler's accidents with, right? So the sub heading is bicycle accidents that Mahler has, and there are a couple of entries, including this one and the next one we'll be talking about.
yeah, yeah. So, as you mentioned about his personality earlier, in the show, you're talking about his drive to, just keep pushing and pushing himself and challenging himself. So what does he do? He lives on the Wörthersee,
Correct.
and probably the most challenging climb, maybe in all of Austria. I have no idea.
Not
One of the
quite. No, there's some,
All right,
but
or let's
for the
call it
time, but yeah,
one of the big ones anyway. It's the Loibel Pass, which today passes into Slovenia. Back then, it was all part of the Austrian Empire, and you got to drive. First off, you have to ride around the lake. Then you have to continue south and up this incredibly steep passage. And this was Mahler's idea again of taking a break. Apparently, you have retraced this ride, Brent. Tell us a
yes.
little bit about it, and we even have a little film from this.
Yeah, so I guess we'll get to the story in a second, but yeah, so it's this climb up the Loibel Pass, and so I mapped that out. It is an absurdly difficult climb, especially so the climb itself starts just outside of Klagenfurt, so if it and very close to his summer home, so he wouldn't have had to have gone very far from his house before he's starting to go uphill. The whole thing is somewhere on the order of 15 or 16 kilometers from bottom to top. And the very top is absurdly steep. And now if you go there, so if you go there now, the road that goes up the Loibel Pass comes up to a certain point, and then there's a tunnel that goes through the mountain and down the other side. And so there's no longer a need to go up to the pass. The paths still exists, and there's a road that goes up both the Austrian and Slovenian side. That's where it gets really treacherously steep, and it's now still a gravel climb, so it is still very difficult even on a modern bicycle with very low gears. The Slovenian side is in fact even steeper, but the road is in better condition on that side because it's more used today. Um, but yeah, it is not an easy climb that he set himself to do when he's going up this thing.
All right. You're now, we have a little film here. This is of you going downhill, I think.
Yeah, and I, I don't know, does it make sense to jump ahead and tell the story before we look at this video?
Okay, maybe we can do that. We
Yeah,
can,
that might make sense because otherwise,
all right, let's stop here and we'll go back to this, I think, because, yeah, I guess we
yeah,
have to set the scene. Yeah.
there's a whole story of right what happens on this climb, and one of the things I needed to sort out is right, where some of these mishaps that he encounters happen because it didn't quite make sense just looking at it on the map or in my map where I map out the gradients. Um, so yeah,
Shall we read
yeah,
Natalie's account of this
yeah. So
harrowing journey?
Natalie tells this story of the account, and it
Okay.
also ends up in Delagrange.
Yeah. But let's read Natalie's own words because she was a firsthand, not necessarily witness to this trip. It sounds like he was alone on this trip, but he, I'm
Yeah.
sure, gave all of the details to her when he got back. And this is literally a trip where Mahler could have died.
Yes.
And unfortunately, some 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 divine angel was looking over his shoulder.
Right.
Let's have that text. He made a still greater. He took a still greater trip. Um, from the
Yeah.
Natalie's. This is a longer text, but we're going to show it to you as we read it because it gives you a better chance to follow. He took an even longer ride on August 10th over the Loibel Pass towards Veldes, which is today Bled. To his great astonishment and effort, when he thought he had almost reached his goal, he had still had hours of effort to push his bike up the steepest ascent, from 400 to 1,400 meters, followed by an almost more laborious descent. He fared the worst, however, when he handed his bike over to a lad who agreed to carry it to the summit for a florin. Relieved of the unnecessary burden, he took shortcuts. That would have, let's see,
Brought
can't,
him
you
instantly
know, I've
brought
got,
him. Yeah.
for some reason, my text has been cut off here for some reason.
Oh,
I don't know why. There,
it's fine for me if you want me
he
to
fared
take
the
a
worst when he was handed his bike to a lad who agreed to carry it to the summit for florin. Relieved of the unnecessary burden, he took shortcuts that would have brought him in an instant to the summit. So I need the next text.
yeah.
He had already reached the final shortcut when he lost his way, and this is where he gets into trouble, and failed at the proper moment to turn, and thus came to the steepest section. He could only continue by walking on all fours. That's how steep it was. But how great was his horror when the gravel pitch finally crested and discharged him into a masonry water ditch. It was smooth and extremely steep, so there were no holds for his hands or feet. Finally, Mahler found a crumbling place in the wall where a clump of ferns had taken hold. These were his salvation. I need the next text. With these, in order not to pull them from their roots, he slowly pulled himself up. Imagine if the ferns had given way. Crawling up on his wedged elbows, he finally reached the road. Unsurprisingly, he emerged from the concluded danger, bathed in sweat, hands and feet bruised. The lad, however, who had arrived at the summit long before, stared at him like an apparition as he ascended unexpectedly from the completely wrong side, as if he had risen from the grave.
Right. Yeah. And so there are this is a good account of this. The first one I found, if you look it up in Delagrange, has all sorts of really confusing things. That the most confusing thing is that he transcribes the name Feldes as Felden, which is the town on the far end of the Wörthersee where he had just ridden. And so
Right.
I'm reading it that saying he rode the Loibel Pass over to Felden. I'm like, it doesn't make sense, right? Geographically, there's no way to make that work. And then only when I found the Bauer-Lechner original did I realize it was Feldes in Slovenia. And so that I figured that out. The other thing that to me didn't really make sense, the 1,400 meters is about the right distance for the Loibel Pass, right? It's pretty close, or the right elevation. It's 1,370. So, rounding up, that's the elevation at the top of the Loibel Pass. But 1,000 meters to climb didn't really make much sense, because, right, that he could get to a point where he thought he was at the top, but still had to go another 1,000. But one thing, when you look at the map of the Loibel Pass, it does have this kind of double crested feature, right? So there's a spot, but it's very early on. It's right a very early spot where it goes up and there's a bit of a descent, and then it kicks back up all the way to the summit. But looking on the map, I thought there's no way this is where he thought he was at the top, right? It didn't really make sense to me that all the way back, it's only maybe 2 or 3 miles into the climb that he would think he was there. keeping in mind, of course, he doesn't have a cycling computer. He doesn't have any reliable way to measure how long he's gone. And going uphill, right, it's difficult, right? So I can understand maybe how he loses track of time. It's like, I'm probably there by now, and wishful thinking can do a lot in those cases for making you think you're to the top. And so that video that I have that we were about to show, one of the things I discovered on my ride is I got to that first spot, and it really does. You come to this moment, you look around, you see a descent down the other side. You feel like you've achieved something, right? You feel like you're at the top, and you start going down, and a few moments later, probably about the time there's an inn on the side of the road that would have been mentioned in the guide that he was using, still there, the Deutsche Peter. Um, he probably sees that and realizes, oh no, right? I am nowhere near where I need to be. And then he keeps going. And then the question of where does he find his way to take the this shortcut? And my sense is there's really only one spot that it could have happened. So just after you go up take the left-hand turn to get onto that dirt road that now goes to the summit, it's not too far before you can see the summit. You can look up and see across this sort of great wide open space where you're headed. But at that point, the road kicks back to the and has several other switchbacks that go off in the opposite direction. And so I can see how he would get to that point and think, it's going to be much easier if I just walk straight up there, right? I can't take my bike, but I'm going to walk straight up there. When you see it from the top, you're basically looking down a cliff face, right? So at some point he's trying to get up this thing, which kind of at the bottom it feels gentle, but at the top it's sort of like going up the side of a bowl. And so eventually he realizes he probably gets into a position where it's like, okay, I could either turn around and go back, where's my bike is at the top now, like, or I can keep going, right? And either the further you keep going, the more danger it is to also go back, right? That the calculus
Right.
of deciding when to give up just stop sort of evaporates, and so he pushes on.
Right.
Exactly how he makes a wrong turn, I'm not really clear on that, but
Yeah.
maybe that was just something that Natalie added or misunderstood in his telling. I don't really know, but yeah.
It's a bit surprising because Mahler was also an avid hiker. I mean, he knew
Hmm.
mountains, he knew mountain tops,
True.
but
Yeah.
he probably had never hiked the Leubel and miscalculated what he was getting himself into. Now, let's take a look at the film because this is from
Yeah.
that area of the. Tell us where we are
Yes.
before we
So
start.
we're just headed up to that first summit. So this is the that first what's known as the Kleine Leubel. So there's the Kleine Leubel and the Grosse Leubel. This is the Kleine Leubel where I was trying to ascertain, right? Could he have thought this was the summit? And my sense after doing it is yes. So this is the crest, and then it's going to start going back down. Um,
Oh, okay. So he thinks, all right. So, but
I'm
actually,
here.
the going down is not the end of the ride. It's just the beginning, just the
It's just
dip
the
before we go back
interlude
up.
before the next uphill. Yeah. But you'll see there's our fast switchbacks.
Yeah.
It, it feels like a descent. It is a descent. It's just not going where you think it is.
Well, it doesn't just feel like a descent. It looks suicidal if you don't have brakes.
Yeah, right. With no brakes, he's probably got his feet up on the fork here.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I can't imagine. I mean,
And
yeah,
then
this
here's
could be
a nice
deadly.
switchback. It's going to keep going down. I think there's two more switchbacks on this before it starts kicking up again.
No, I just can't imagine this. He must have had some way to brake. Otherwise, it would.
Yeah,
Uh,
he had brakes, but they're not sufficient to stop the bike on something like this. They're sufficient to slow you down, but if you really tried to stop, you would probably burn up the tire, or puncture it in one way or another. So
so Mahler, who rode on Wörthersee and banged himself up, is now going up the Leubel Pass, knowing that these are the conditions he's facing. I don't know.
right.
That's just an incredible. That's either stubbornness or a sense of invincibility. I don't know quite
Yeah,
how to characterize that.
yeah.
Wow. Well, okay, so he's now in it's he's now in at Wörthersee. As we know, he then heads off to um, um, uh, to Toblach, but he's actually going to be slowing down his bicycling activities quite markedly now, even before 1907,
Mhm.
even before the diagnosis. Because there's another problem that he faces, and it's mentioned in one of his letters to Zinne, jokingly, but this catches up to him, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there's an early letter, one of those letters to Cinna, or it's actually to a different colleague who he's trying to get to send his bike to Steinbach, but he says, I need my bicycle, right? I'm in Steinbach, my bike hasn't arrived yet. Um, but he says, but the reason he gives for why he needs it is because he says he's suffering from his old complaint of hemorrhoids, and bicycling is the only thing that will cure it, which of course, right, is not a cure, right? And we assume Mahler did not or knew that, right, that this was
I think it's a way of saying this
pretty
is going
clear.
to
Yeah,
make things worse, but I'll take it.
probably. I'm doing it anyway, right? Yeah. So so that, but yeah, so he had some sort of a hemorrhoid issue. He also mentioned subterranean issues. I
Yeah,
think that's his general term for digestive tract problems that had plagued him for a while.
yeah,
But it's only the next year after this ride in Meijernig that Justine comes home and finds him lying in a pool of blood, having had a serious hemorrhage. A doctor is called, and the doctor tells him, if the timing had been slightly different, if he had gotten there an hour later, he would not have survived it, right? So he's having significant health issues that are not just an inconvenience, but life-threatening, and that leads him to not ride as much. I would assume for the right. It's why we don't. I assume this is why we don't see so much about riding in the next few years. When riding crops up over the next years in letters to Alma, for example, he says things like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not riding that much, and I go slowly now." Right? She's worried about whether he's riding too much,
mhm,
and he's reassuring her that he is not. So
yeah,
right. So it definitely takes a curtailed after about this point in 1900.
yeah. He's also a father,
Right.
and a
Yeah, there's that
husband,
too, right?
and
Obviously, that changes everything as
yeah,
well. Um,
yeah. So he starts to curve back on this. But in our last 10 minutes here or so, let's think a little bit about, okay, Mahler rode a bicycle, but what does it tell us when we get to know this other side of him, or perhaps this unknown side of him? Uh, what are we left with? What can we say about Mahler in a more general sense or a more specific sense?
right. So, as in a general sense, right, I think we've talked about right this question of how he maybe uses physical struggle as a way of either uh, understanding the compositional process, what he's going through as he's writing music, or as a way of clearing his head, and also a way of experiencing nature and then reflecting that in his music. I think that's also clearly something that is right part of his music from the beginning. Right, we've got the Naturlaut in the first symphony and various things in the third. Him telling Bruno Walter that he doesn't need to look at the beautiful hills around Steinbach because it's already in his music, right? So he's doing these interesting things with nature already. What I see maybe cycling is providing him is a way of not just thinking of nature as something to be represented as a soundscape, but as reflecting the experience of nature, right? Either cycling or hiking in listening to symphonies. And in a specific sense, right? I have all this research that I had done on the bicycle. I'm looking for something to do, right? I'm looking for some way to apply this to his music, and maybe especially with this idea of summits. And so right, and it's something that comes up elsewhere. I think we have the slide may be a little bit later. Actually, right, and I guess right. There's also the athletic question. I don't know if we want to talk about the roller quotation or not. Um, right, his physique is something that comes up. But in any case, right, I'm looking for a way to connect this to the music, and so I'll just do a little name drop here. But I was asking a colleague at Brown University, who's also a Mahler fan, like which symphony might you associate with summits, right? What's something that has a summit, right? We could think of the ending of just about any symphony as being a summit in some way or another, right? The second could be a summit when you get to the end. But my colleague David Josephson said, well, what about the Fifth Symphony? And what he told me just lined up so perfectly that it sort of obsessed me from there on out, is trying to figure out a way of interpreting the Fifth Symphony in terms of this as a kind of summit, and in particular, not just any summit, but I think that it relates to the Leubelpass. I think that it is him using his experience on that day in the Leubelpass as a way of solving a compositional problem, and then putting that into play in the way that he writes the Fifth Symphony.
I'm going to stop you there because there is
Well,
something
we're
that
getting a little out of order maybe, but
there's an aspect of this that you mentioned in relation to the Second Symphony, and where he actually talks about a summit, which
that
in
was,
other words, this is a composition that he's associating with the notion of summit. He doesn't do this in any correspondence that we know about for the Fifth, but certainly in the Second Symphony.
Yeah.
So I've taken flight, for example, in the finale of the Second, when I have reached a summit, I leave it with great reluctance, and then it is a matter of reaching for another, even higher one, unattainable during the first ascent.
Right now, I think this is telling us a bit of a kind of a compositional problem for him, right? That there's something about achieving the end of a symphony, right? You want it to feel like a destination. You want it to feel like you've arrived somewhere. And yet, if you're only arriving there for the first time, you don't want to leave it, right? You want to stay there. You don't want the summit to just have nothing happen, right? So you want to have maybe a way in which you prepare the idea of what the summit is going to be, so that it actually feels like an arrival. It feels like a payoff when you actually get there, right? That's maybe the compositional problem that he is outlining in that little passage we just read.
Also, it points to something that you're going to say about the Fifth Symphony, and that is, I've reached one summit, but now I want to go to the next one. And there's something oddly parallel about what happens in the Fifth Symphony with how he uses the chorale.
Right. So what David Josephson's suggestion was, he says, well, there's this double summit, right? You have a summit at the end of the Second Symphony, right? The second movement. Second movement. You get to the end of the second movement, and almost out of nowhere, you arrive at this thing that feels like a summit, right? It feels climactic, and then just as you're getting to it, it kind of falls apart, and it dissipates. And I think we have a shot of the score maybe that we could put up.
We have the manuscript, and there's a very telling word at that point.
Right. So we get this chorale melody that crests, and it comes to this thing. He writes Höhepunkt, or high point, or climax. He's very specific about where he places this. And so it's leading up to this moment, and when it's conducted well, you get to that spot, and it's precisely there that it all starts falling apart, right? You get there and you realize, oh no, this is not the summit. And then it goes back to the regular material of the Second Symphony, or the second movement. I keep saying that. And then it's lost, right? It's gone for the scherzo. It's gone for the adagietto. It doesn't even really show up in the finale, right? So, and it's sort of left as this thing that appeared for a moment out of nowhere, right? Unprepared, but it's preparing for what's going to happen at the very end of the last movement, right? And so in that last movement, and one thing we're not going to have time to show you, but if you listen to that last movement, about 6 minutes from the end, there is a moment where you have just like a half of a phrase of that chorale melody. It shows up. And for me, I don't know if this is true for anybody else, but anytime I hear that now, it's the experience of having done enough of these cycling hill climbs on my own. There are always these points where you keep going around switchbacks and you can't see anything. And then you see the summit in the distance, right? And it's there for a second, and you know it's there, but you also aren't there yet. And then it disappears. And right. So it's like the summit pops out from behind a cloud, and then it falls away again. And then it finally does come back at the very end of the symphony. And I think it's the Leubelpass, right? That's how I hear it in any case.
So let's cue the end, because you'll hear this enormous sense of arrival. I know that many of you know this music, but I think it's a nice way to also end our show. it is.
Yeah.
Well,
After
so
that.
we reached the summit after all.
Yes.
Scarred and bruised, but happy.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess, the one thing that you have to say about that, right? If you're going to interpret the Fifth Symphony, which I know not everybody's necessarily on board with this as being about the Leubelpass, it's not an accurate representation, right? There was no triumph in the way he arrived at the at the summit, right? He was scrambling over. He didn't even have his bike with him. It feels like what it would have felt like had he actually ridden the climb, right? So that's what it feels like, not the actual feeling of getting to the top.
Well, many thanks for being on our show today, Brent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just one quick announcement. This month, Jason Starr is premiering his latest documentary on Mahler entitled Cosmic Portal, exploring Mahler's Symphony of a Thousand. Both New York City screenings on the 11th of September at the Austrian Cultural Forum and an upcoming presentation on 26th September, both presented by the Gustav Mahler Society of New York, are sold out. But we hope to be able to present you more on this exciting new film in a future episode of the Mahler Hour. The Mahler Hour, brought to you by Mahler Foundation and contributors around the world, is a monthly streaming event bringing together individuals interested in the composer, the thinker, the humanist, Gustav Mahler, as we explore not only his life and works, but also how his legacy still informs essential aspects of the human experience, and how we can turn that experience into a force for the good in today's world. Become a member and support our activities. I want to thank my guest today, Brent Wetters, for joining us, as well as Francisco Bricio for production. The Mahler Hour is back on 25 October to discuss the latest film by Hilan Warshaw entitled Mahler in New York. The filmmaker will be my guest, and that's the Mahler Hour on the 25th of October. I hope you can join us. That's our program for today. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.